It was a Thursday night, the kind of night when the world feels settled and quiet. The television hummed softly in the background, half forgotten, while I scrolled aimlessly through some work emails on my phone. The kitchen clock ticked in its steady rhythm, the dog slept by the couch, and everything about the house radiated an illusion of peace. Then, my phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual. My wife and I often texted back and forth, even when we were in different corners of the same house. But this time the vibration felt different, as if some unspoken warning had crept into the air. I reached for the phone, expecting something ordinary, a request to bring her a glass of water, a reminder about tomorrow's errands, maybe even a playful emoji. Instead, my eyes locked on a message that froze my breath in my throat. "I think maybe we need to break up." Just like that. 11 words. No explanation. No lead-up. No tenderness. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe she meant to send it to someone else, maybe it was a draft she accidentally sent. But the longer I stared at it, the harder it became to deny the coldness in her choice of words. There was no typo, no accidental press of the send button, this was deliberate. I sat there in the living room, phone glowing in my hand, my mind racing in 10 different directions. What did she mean? Maybe. What kind of wife says, "Maybe we need to break up," in a text message to her husband after years of marriage? The word itself was crueler than a clean cut. It suggested doubt, hesitation, or, worse, options she was weighing. A storm of thoughts crashed over me. Had she met someone else? Was she unhappy for longer than she let on? Or was this some kind of twisted test to see how I would react? I scrolled back through our recent conversations, looking for cracks I might have missed. The texts were simple, reminders, quick exchanges, goodnight notes. Nothing suggested she was pulling away. And yet, here it was, undeniable and blunt. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat with the silence, the glow of the phone burning into my eyes. 1,000 memories replayed, our wedding day, the honeymoon, the first apartment, the late-night arguments that ended in laughter, even the ordinary mornings where she'd kiss me before rushing out the door. Were those memories already dead in her mind when she typed this out? I wanted to reply immediately, but my fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard. What was I supposed to say? Beg her to explain? Plead with her not to leave? Rage at her for choosing a text over a face-to-face conversation? Every option felt wrong. So I did nothing. I placed the phone face down on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My heart pounded against my ribs, every beat echoing with the weight of betrayal and confusion. Minutes passed. The television continued to play to an empty room. She didn't follow up her message with anything, no clarification, no apology, no correction. Just silence. That silence became louder than the message itself. My mind drifted back to the past few weeks. She had been different, though at the time I had chalked it up to stress from work. Late nights at the office. More time with her friends. Less time with me. I had brushed it off as normal. After all, every marriage has its ups and downs. But now, with that text as the backdrop, each of those little details screamed at me like warning sirens I had ignored. I remembered the way she guarded her phone, tilting the screen away when notifications appeared. I remembered the new perfume she wore, one I hadn't bought her, one she claimed was a gift from a friend. I remembered the sudden gym membership, the weekend work events I wasn't invited to. At the time, I didn't let my imagination run wild. But tonight, in the shadow of those 11 words, the pieces started to fall into a picture I didn't want to see. Still, part of me clung to denial. Maybe she was testing me, maybe she was venting, maybe she wanted attention. I thought about marching upstairs and demanding an explanation right then and there. But another part of me, the part that felt cold, analytical, detached, told me not to. If she wanted to end things, if she wanted me to know she was ready to break away, then maybe there was more beneath the surface than she would ever admit. And I needed to find out. That was the moment something shifted in me. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it, a strange calm began to spread. If she thought she could shatter me with one text, she didn't know me as well as she believed. If there was a truth hiding behind those words, I would uncover it. Not by raging, not by pleading, but by watching, by listening, by planning. I picked the phone back up. My thumb hovered over the keyboard again. My first instinct was to type out, "What do you mean?" But I deleted it. Too weak. Then I tried, "Is there someone else?" Deleted again. Too desperate. Finally, I typed something simple, unexpected, and almost unnervingly calm. "Okay." That was all. One word. A mirror to her, maybe. A word that would unnerve her as much as her message had shaken me. I didn't send it yet. My finger hovered over the blue arrow. I thought about the look on her face when she'd see that reply. Not the begging she expected. Not the rage she might have prepared for. Just quiet acceptance. It was then I realized, this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a different one. The chapter where masks start to slip, where truth is dragged out of the shadows. I finally pressed send. And the game began.
The heavy door closed behind her with a hiss, sealing Maya into the engine bay. For a moment, the silence pressed in, thick and expectant. The air smelled of oil, rust, and faint ozone, the scent of machinery that had once lived but had long since died. She stood alone, except for the great hulking beast of an engine that dominated the chamber like a slumbering giant. From behind the glass partition, the silhouettes of Stratton and his executives hovered like vultures, their voices muffled. Their laughter had faded, but Maya knew what they were thinking. They expected her to poke around aimlessly, to fumble until her ignorance betrayed her. They were waiting to watch her fail. She ignored them. Maya drew in a deep breath, exhaling slowly. She removed the small satchel she always carried, tools her father had left her, not expensive chrome instruments but worn, reliable pieces. A screwdriver dulled with age, a set of pliers with the handle taped, a tiny flashlight with scratches down its barrel. She laid them out carefully, as though placing sacred objects on an altar. Then she approached the engine. Up close, it was even more daunting, a labyrinth of pipes snaking around a core cylinder, wires trailing like veins across its steel skin. The pistons were thick, their surfaces scorched, pitted with failed ignition attempts. The housing bore scorch marks, faint but telling. Someone had forced the machine beyond what it could handle. Maya pressed her hand to the metal. It was cold now, but she imagined the heat it must have once held, the roar it had been meant to unleash. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening. It wasn't magic, just the habit her father had taught her. Engines speak to you, if you quiet yourself long enough. Her flashlight beam cut across the surface, illuminating details the engineers before her had likely dismissed. A crack, so fine it was nearly invisible, ran along the casing of the intake manifold. A burn pattern traced the wires, not random but consistent, pointing to an overload. She crouched lower, brushing her fingers across the bolts that anchored the main cylinder. Several were worn unevenly, suggesting vibration beyond tolerance. Maya pulled out her notebook. She began sketching quickly, drawing the layout as she saw it, not as the glossy schematics had once promised it would be. She mapped the scars, the inconsistencies, the flaws. Ridiculous. A muffled voice scoffed from the other side of the glass. She glanced up to see one of Stratton's executives shaking his head. They thought she was doodling. But Maya wasn't doodling, she was listening. She crawled to the rear panel, unscrewing a small access port. The cover fell open with a metallic clang. Inside, the circuitry was a mess of frayed insulation and charred nodes. She whistled softly under her breath. "Whoever built you didn't respect you," she murmured. Her father's voice rose again from memory. An engine is only as strong as the hands that assemble it. Treat it with care, and it will live longer than you. Treat it with arrogance, and it will die before its time. She could almost picture him standing beside her, wiping grease from his brow, nodding at her discovery. The designers of this so-called revolutionary engine had chased ambition, but ignored simplicity. They had layered complexity over complexity, never pausing to see that the heart of it, its basic pulse, was unstable. Maya shifted onto her back and slid beneath the machine. Dust coated the floor, and the cold concrete pressed against her spine, but she hardly noticed. Her flashlight illuminated the underside of the beast. There it was again, the same uneven wear, the same vibration pattern, spreading like a disease through every component. The problem isn't the parts, she thought. It's the rhythm. Machines lived on rhythm, pistons firing, gears turning, fuel sparking at the right instant. Break the rhythm, and you invited chaos. She crawled back out, standing to stretch her stiff back. Outside the glass, Stratton raised an eyebrow. His arms were folded, his expression one of smug patience, as though humoring a child. He leaned toward one of his aides and whispered something that drew quiet chuckles. Maya didn't flinch. She returned to her notebook, writing observations in quick strokes. Manifold crack, stress fracture, likely pressure imbalance. Circuit burn overload, repeated pattern systemic fault, not random. Uneven vibration alignment issue. She tapped the pencil against the page, thinking. Alignment. That was the heart of it. This engine wasn't impossible. It was misaligned from birth. Its creators had forced it to bear weight in a way its frame couldn't sustain. She needed to see deeper. Maya reached for her father's battered stethoscope, the same one he had once pressed against car hoods, listening to the heartbeat of combustion. She placed it gently against the engine casing and wrapped her knuckles across the metal. Each hollow note echoed differently. She listened carefully, mapping the sound. When she found a spot where the echo stuttered, she circled it on her sketch. A flaw inside the chamber, hidden from view. Her pulse quickened. She was close. But time was slipping away. Stratton had given her 2 hours, and already the clock ticked mercilessly above the glass wall. She had to work faster. Maya rose, scanning the machine one final time, letting the whole picture settle into her mind. The cracked manifold, the burnt circuits, the stuttering chamber, they weren't separate failures. They were symptoms of the same sickness. The impossible engine wasn't broken beyond repair. It had been misunderstood. She turned to the glass wall. Stratton was watching her now, his smirk replaced with faint curiosity. He leaned closer, his silver cufflinks flashing under the light. "Well?" he mouthed through the glass. Maya wiped the sweat from her brow. She wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. She needed the proof, the spark that would silence them all. She crouched again, her flashlight tracing along the wires, until it found the junction feeding into the core chamber. The insulation had bubbled, melted. She carefully stripped a piece back with her pliers. The copper beneath was blackened. The current had surged too high too often. "They fed you lies," she whispered to the machine. "Promise you could be more than you were built for." And suddenly she understood. The engineers had tried to force efficiency by overloading circuits that couldn't bear it. Instead of rebalancing the design, they had pushed harder, demanding perfection from imperfection. The result had been inevitable: collapse. Her notebook filled with notes, arrows connecting one failure to another until the map was complete. She snapped it shut, her heart hammering. Outside, Stratton tapped his watch, raising his brows as if to say, "Time's almost up." Maya straightened. She looked at the engine, this misunderstood giant, and then at the line of skeptics beyond the glass. The inspection was complete. She knew what needed to be done. But proving it, that would be the real battle. Maya sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, her back against the silent steel of the great engine. Her flashlight lay beside her, its beam casting sharp shadows across the notebook pages balanced on her lap. For nearly an hour, she had been sketching, diagramming, mapping not just what she saw, but what she felt. It wasn't enough to see the machine. She had to understand its story. Every scar on its casing told of hands that had built in haste, executives who had demanded miracles faster than patience allowed. Every scorch mark whispered of arrogance. And yet, beneath those wounds, she sensed potential. The rhythm might be broken, but the heart still beat faintly, waiting for the right touch. Her pencil slowed. She closed her eyes. And, unbidden, the memories came. It was late summer years ago. The garage smelled of gasoline and warm dust. Her father, Earl Brooks, leaned over the open hood of an old pickup, his forearms dark with grease. He hummed low and steady, a tune she never knew the name of, but that always settled her spirit. "Listen here, Maya," he said, handing her a small wrench. She couldn't have been more than 12, but he treated her like an equal. "This truck ain't just metal. It's a living thing. You treat it like scrap, it'll betray you. But you treat it with respect, and it'll carry you further than you dreamed." She had leaned closer, eyes wide, watching the pistons pump as he turned the crank. "But how do you know what it needs?" Her father chuckled. "Machines got a language. Not what you read in books. You feel it. You hear it. Close your eyes and listen, and it'll tell you what's wrong." And so she had. In the whir and click of gears, in the cough of the engine, she had heard what he meant. Not words exactly, but something deeper. A rhythm, a pulse, a cry for help. Maya blinked, returning to the present. Her fingers trembled faintly on the pencil. "That's what I need now. Not just knowledge. Memory." She rose, stretching her legs. Outside the glass, Stratton lounged in his chair, bored, though occasionally glancing up with a flicker of impatience. His executives muttered among themselves. To them, her silence was proof of failure. To her, it was the opposite. Silence was listening. She circled the engine slowly, running her hand over the steel, pausing where the rhythm stuttered. She pressed her ear to the surface, then used her father's battered stethoscope again, tapping, listening, moving. Each hollow note painted the picture clearer. The manifold crack, the burnt wiring, the stutter in the chamber, they weren't accidents. They were warnings. The designers hadn't listened. They had forced the machine beyond its natural rhythm, ignoring what it told them until it collapsed under the weight of their ambition. Maya crouched by the exposed circuitry again. She held her flashlight close, tracing the lines of melted insulation. She could see where they had tried to compensate, layering on additional fuses, rerouting wires in desperation. But the core misalignment remained. "They tried to silence you," she whispered to the engine. "But I hear you." She picked up her pliers, delicately adjusting a wire, not to repair but to test. The faintest spark jumped, a pulse of life that died as quickly as it came. Yet her heart leapt. That pulse had been enough. Her father's words echoed, "Every engine has a secret. Find it, and you'll find the truth." And she had found it. The secret wasn't in the parts. It wasn't in the schematics or the circuits. It was in the rhythm. The engine wasn't broken. It was silenced by imbalance. Correct the rhythm, and it would sing again. But how to prove it? She had only an hour left. Stratton was already restless. If she spoke too soon, they would mock her. She needed something undeniable. Maya stood, brushing dust from her jeans. She opened her satchel again and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. She unrolled it carefully. Inside lay her father's old timing gauge, a tool so worn it looked like scrap. But it was precise, more precise, she believed, than all the million-dollar equipment Stratton's engineers had thrown at the problem. She set it gently against the chamber housing. The needle quivered. She adjusted it, listening to the faint resonance deep within the core. Again and again she tested, moving around the engine, marking points in her notebook. Each reading confirmed her suspicion. The engine's heart was misaligned by a fraction, just enough to throw its rhythm into chaos. Her pulse raced. She wasn't imagining this. She had proof. A sharp knock on the glass startled her. She turned to see Stratton standing now, arms folded. He tapped his watch pointedly, then raised a mocking brow. She straightened, meeting his gaze through the glass. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the notebook and held it up, pages filled with notes and sketches. Stratton's smirk faltered. He couldn't read the details from where he stood, but he could see the precision, the method, the clarity. This wasn't guesswork. She lowered the notebook, her chin high. She had seen his arrogance. Now it was his turn to see her knowledge. But Maya wasn't finished. She crouched again, pulling a length of wire from her satchel. She stripped the ends, connected it to a bypass circuit she improvised from the engine's failed components, and attached it to her father's timing gauge. She adjusted carefully, aligning the circuit to what the rhythm demanded, not what the schematics it claimed. The faintest hum stirred. It wasn't the roar of success, but it was enough to ripple the silence. Outside the glass, several executives straightened in surprise. Stratton leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Maya smiled faintly. "There you are," she murmured to the machine. It wasn't running yet. It wasn't alive. But she had coaxed it into whispering. And that whisper was enough to prove she wasn't chasing ghosts. The hourglass was running dry. She packed her tools, wiped her hands, and stood once more. Maya turned to face Stratton. Her eyes burned with quiet fire. She tapped the notebook against her palm, then mouthed two words through the glass. "It works!" The executives erupted into laughter, shaking their heads. But Stratton didn't laugh. His smirk had vanished. He studied her, silent, as though weighing something he didn't want to admit. The hiss of the reinforced door broke the silence. It swung open, and Arthur Stratton himself stepped into the engine chamber. For hours, he had watched her behind the glass, first with amusement, then with faint unease. Now, with time nearly spent, he wanted to deliver the killing blow himself. His polished shoes clicked against the concrete as he walked slowly toward her. His reflection glinted in the steel surface of the engine, tall and commanding in his tailored suit. He clasped his hands behind his back, his smirk returning as he studied Maya crouched beside the massive machine. "Well, well," he said, his voice echoing off the walls. "The mechanic from the neighborhood garage, scribbling in her little notebook, whispering to dead metal as though it were alive. You put on quite a performance, I'll grant you that." Maya didn't look up from her notes. "It's not dead," she replied. "You just don't know how to listen." Stratton chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, how charming. Philosophy from someone who probably learned engines on rusted trucks held together by duct tape and prayers. My dear, do you understand what you're standing in front of? This machine cost hundreds of millions to design. The greatest minds in the world spent years on it. And you think, what? Your little toolbox and your memories of tinkering with your daddy make you their equal?" The words were calculated, dripping with disdain. He wanted to see her flinch, to shrink under the weight of his authority. But Maya simply turned a page in her notebook and kept sketching. That silence unsettled him more than any outburst could have. He crouched slightly, his face level with hers. "Tell me, Miss Brooks," he said softly, mock sweetness curling around the words. "What will you say when this little charade collapses? When the investors laugh you out of this building? Will you cry? Will you curse me for embarrassing you?" Maya finally met his eyes. Her voice was calm, steady, and stronger than he expected. "No," she said. "I'll tell them the truth. That your arrogance killed this engine before it ever had a chance." The smirk slipped. For a second, his jaw tightened. But he recovered quickly, standing tall again. "Arrogance?" he repeated, his tone sharp. "I built this empire on arrogance. On risk. On vision. Without it, we'd still be driving horse carts." He jabbed a finger toward the engine. "This machine is a failure because the world isn't ready for it. Not because of me. Or maybe," Maya said, rising to her feet and closing her notebook, "it's a failure because you never respected it." A laugh burst from one of the executives watching through the glass, though it carried a nervous edge. Stratton's eyes narrowed, his pride stung. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone he considered beneath him. He stepped closer, invading her space, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're special because you see things differently. But let me tell you something, Ms. Brooks. Different doesn't mean right. It means dangerous. And in this world, dangerous people get crushed." Maya didn't move. "Then you should have crushed me already," she said. The defiance hung in the air like a spark. For a moment, the great Arthur Stratton was speechless. He stared at her, expecting to see fear in her eyes. Instead, he found something unnerving, calm, unshakable conviction. He forced a laugh, trying to shake it off. "Confidence without results is just noise," he said, striding away from her, his shoes striking harder against the floor now. "And I don't invest in noise." He turned back at the doorway, his voice loud enough to echo through the chamber. "You have 30 minutes left. 30 minutes to prove you're not wasting my time. Fail, and you'll walk out of here forgotten." He paused, his gaze raking over her, cruel and dismissive. "And trust me, no one will remember the name Maya Brooks." With that, he left, the door hissing shut behind him. The silence returned. But this time, it felt heavier. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling the anger burning in her chest. His words were meant to break her, to make her doubt herself. He had underestimated her, dismissed her, taunted her. But beneath his arrogance, she had seen it, the flicker of unease when she refused to bend. That flicker was her strength. She turned back to the engine, laying her hands against the cold metal once more. "They don't believe in you," she whispered. "But I do." The words steadied her. She gathered her tools, moving with renewed focus. Stratton thought taunts would rattle her. Instead, they lit the fire she needed. She crouched again, connecting her makeshift bypass to the melted circuit. The faint hum she had coaxed earlier returned, stronger this time. She adjusted the timing gauge, fine-tuning the rhythm she had discovered. The hum steadied, a soft vibration through the steel. It wasn't alive yet, not fully. But it was closer. Maya smiled faintly. Stratton could taunt her all he wanted. He could call her names, belittle her background, dismiss her tools as junk. None of it mattered. The machine was speaking to her. And she was listening. Through the glass, Stratton had returned to his seat, watching her like a hawk. His smirk had faded, though he masked it with feigned amusement for his audience. The executives chuckled at his earlier jabs, but their eyes kept drifting back to Maya. They had seen it too, that faint hum, the whisper of life. "Parlor trick," one muttered. "Coincidence," said another. But Stratton didn't answer. He just stared, his jaw tight. Inside the chamber, Maya wiped sweat from her brow, her hands moving with purpose. She wasn't here to win his respect. She wasn't here for their applause. She was here because she knew something they didn't. Arrogance builds empires, but knowledge keeps them standing. And Maya Brooks had knowledge hidden in her hands, knowledge passed down in grease-stained garages and whispered through the hum of old engines. Knowledge Stratton could never buy. 30 minutes left. 30 minutes to silence his taunts forever. She bent closer to the engine, her eyes fierce, her heart steady. "Let's show them," she whispered. The engine hummed back in reply. The seconds ticked away with merciless precision. The great clock above the glass partition glowed red, its digits counting down like a judge's gavel. 20 minutes left. Maya's hands moved swiftly, her mind sharper than ever. She adjusted the bypass wire she had rigged, tightening the copper connection. The faint hum coursing through the machine grew steadier. It wasn't the triumphant roar of a working engine, but it was progress, proof of rhythm returning. Outside, the executives leaned closer to the glass. Their mocking smiles had thinned. The arrogance that had filled the room hours earlier was slowly giving way to unease. They could see something happening, even if they didn't understand it. Arthur Stratton sat perfectly still in his chair, his eyes locked on her. His face was unreadable, but his jaw twitched slightly, betraying tension. He had taunted her, dismissed her, given her 30 minutes to humiliate herself. Now the possibility loomed that he might be the one humiliated. Maya wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving streaks of oil across the faded denim. She glanced once at the clock, then back at the engine. Her father's voice echoed again in her mind, steady and guiding. "Find the pulse, Maya. The first spark always comes from the pulse." She crouched by the manifold again, pressing her stethoscope against the steel. The hum vibrated faintly, uneven but alive. She tapped her notes. The crack in the manifold wasn't the cause, it was the symptom. The real flaw lay in the alignment of the ignition chamber, and she was closing in on it. Her flashlight beam caught a faint groove near the ignition coil, as though someone had forced a component into place without recalibrating it. She narrowed her eyes. That was it. The chamber had been misaligned from the very beginning, every test doomed before it even started. "Your secret's safe with me," she whispered to the machine. "Now let's set you free." She pulled out her father's old wrench, its metal worn smooth by decades of use. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't modern, but it fit her hand like it belonged there. She loosened the bolt holding the coil, adjusted the angle by the smallest fraction, then tightened it again. The hum deepened. She froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. That sound, it wasn't imagination. The machine had shifted. It had acknowledged her touch. A spark flickered deep inside, faint but real. Gasps erupted from behind the glass. Executives pressed closer, eyes wide. Stratton's lips parted slightly before he pressed them into a thin line. Maya exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Don't rush," she told herself. "Engines don't respond to panic. They respond to patience." She checked her bypass again, fine-tuned the connection, then leaned close. "Come on," she murmured, her fingers brushing the steel. "I know you want to wake up." She flipped the switch on her makeshift circuit. The engine coughed. Not a roar, not even a hum, but a cough. A sputter of life, like the first breath of something long asleep. Sparks spat from the coil, the faintest tremor rippling through the frame. The sound reverberated through the chamber. To Maya, it was beautiful. To the executives, it was terrifying. Stratton shot to his feet. His chair screeched backward. "What?" he barked, his voice muffled through the glass. Maya didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the engine, her hands steady as she coaxed the machine like a doctor reviving a patient. Another adjustment, another spark. The cough came again, longer this time, followed by a hum that lingered. It wasn't stable yet, but it was alive. On the other side of the glass, the room was chaos. "She's tampering with it," one executive shouted. "She's going to blow it up," cried another. "Security should pull her out." But Stratton raised a hand, silencing them. His face was pale now, his eyes narrowed. Something inside him refused to admit it, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The impossible engine, silent for years, mocked by the best engineers money could buy, was stirring under the touch of a woman he had dismissed as unworthy. "Keep watching," he muttered. Inside, Maya's pulse raced. Sweat dripped down her temple, stinging her eyes. She could feel the minutes slipping away, but she didn't let fear dictate her movements. The rhythm was guiding her now. Her father's voice returned, soft but clear. "Don't force it, Maya. Let it come alive on its own terms. Nurture it. Trust it." She adjusted the coil again. Another spark flared. The hum steadied, longer this time, pulsing through the frame. She could feel it under her palms, a vibration that resonated with her heartbeat. The engine wasn't roaring yet, but it was breathing. She stood slowly, stepping back to take it in. Her chest tightened with emotion. For years this machine had been mocked, abandoned, declared impossible. And yet here it was, whispering its resilience to the one person willing to listen. She glanced toward the glass. The executives were pale, their smirks erased. Stratton stood frozen, his hands gripping the railing, his eyes locked on her with something he could no longer hide: fear. Maya raised her chin, her eyes unwavering. She didn't need to speak. The engine spoke for her. The coughs came again, louder now, reverberating through the chamber. The hum grew steadier, though it faltered at times, like a child learning to walk. Maya noted every vibration, every inconsistency, committing them to memory. She knew exactly what had to be done to stabilize it, but that would take time, and her minutes were running out. Still, she had proven what no one else had dared: the engine could live. The first spark had come. Stratton slammed his hand against the glass, startling his executives. His voice carried, muffled but furious. "Shut it down!" Maya didn't move. She kept her hand on the engine, feeling its pulse. "Not yet," she whispered. Security guards rushed to the door, but Stratton hesitated, his pride battling his fear. If he pulled her out now, he would admit she had succeeded where he had failed. If he let her continue, she might humiliate him further. The tension crackled thicker than the sparks dancing in the engine. Maya stood tall, her eyes never leaving Stratton's. Her voice was calm, but every word struck like steel. "This engine isn't impossible. You just never knew how to listen." The engine sputtered again, louder this time, filling the chamber with a vibration that made the glass tremble. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was undeniable. The first spark had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hum inside the chamber grew louder, steadier, vibrating against the steel walls. Sparks crackled along Maya's bypass wires, flickering like fireflies in the dark. The engine was not fully alive, but it was breathing, fighting, straining, as though it wanted desperately to wake. Behind the glass, the executives erupted into panic. They weren't engineers. They were money men, trained to recognize risk, not rhythm. The sight of a long-dead machine sputtering back to life under the hands of someone they had ridiculed unsettled them more than they could admit. "Sir, this is dangerous," one stammered, tugging at Stratton's sleeve. "It could overload. We should shut it down." But Arthur Stratton didn't move. His eyes were locked on Maya, unblinking, his face pale with a mixture of fury and fascination. For years this machine had mocked him, mocked his empire. And now, this woman, this outsider, was unraveling the mystery his brightest minds had failed to touch. "Not yet," Stratton muttered, his voice hard. "Not yet." Inside the chamber, Maya ignored the chaos. She crouched once more by the ignition coil, her fingers adjusting the alignment she had discovered earlier. The engine's rhythm trembled, faltered, then steadied again. It wasn't enough. The imbalance was still there, lurking like a crack in a foundation. Unless she exposed it fully, the engine would never hold. She grabbed her flashlight and slid beneath the frame again, the cold concrete biting her back. She traced the undercarriage, her light following the grooves of the pistons and gears. Then she saw it, a misaligned shaft, forced into place by engineers desperate to meet deadlines. It wasn't built wrong, it was forced wrong. And that single compromise had doomed the entire project. Her breath caught. So that's it. That's the barrier. She crawled out, wiping grime from her face. Her heart thundered as she wrote in her notebook. Core misalignment. Forced installation. Vibration spread systemic failure. Must reset foundation. Her father's voice filled her again, firm and certain. Never build on a crooked base, Maya. You fix the root, or everything collapses. She closed her notebook and whispered, "Time to break the barrier." The door hissed open. Stratton entered again, his footsteps sharp, his presence filling the chamber like a storm. "Enough," he snapped. "This game is over." Maya didn't look up. "It's not a game." He approached, his face inches from hers, his voice low and seething. "You think you've proven something with your little sparks? You haven't. This engine will never work. You've wasted my time, and in 10 minutes, I'll make sure everyone knows it." Maya finally stood, squaring her shoulders against him. Oil streaked her blouse, dust coated her jeans, but her eyes blazed with unshakable fire. "You're wrong," she said. "I know what the problem is. And I can fix it." Stratton barked a bitter laugh. "You? Fix what no one else could? Do you even hear yourself?" She held his gaze without flinching. "The problem isn't the engine. The problem is you. You forced it to be something it wasn't designed to be. You bent it to your arrogance until it broke." The word struck harder than any spark. For a moment, Stratton's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. He hated being told the truth, especially by someone he had already deemed beneath him. "You've got nerve," he said through gritted teeth. "But nerve doesn't change physics." "No," Maya replied softly. "Knowledge does." She turned away from him, kneeling by the misaligned shaft. She pointed to the worn grooves, the uneven bolts. "See this?" she said, her voice loud enough for the executives beyond the glass to hear. "This was forced. You didn't realign the chamber before installation. The vibration spread from here through the entire system. That's why it cracked, why it burned out, why it failed every test." The room behind the glass fell silent. The executives leaned closer, their expressions stunned. Even they could see the evidence. Stratton's face darkened. "You don't know that," he snapped. "I do." She pulled her father's wrench from her satchel and held it up. "And I can prove it." He stared at the battered tool, sneering. That relic? My engineers used instruments worth more than your house. And yet," Maya said, her tone calm, "they failed. This will not." She crouched, loosening the bolts one by one. Her hands moved with practiced precision, the rhythm of decades spent in grease-stained garages guiding her. The shaft groaned as she adjusted it, aligning it with painstaking care. The engine shuddered, sparks flying. For a terrifying moment, the hum faltered, dipping into silence. Gasps filled the air behind the glass. "Maya, stop!" one executive cried. But Maya didn't stop. She held steady, her jaw clenched, sweat dripping down her brow. "Come on," she whispered to the machine. "Breathe with me." She tightened the final bolt. The engine exhaled. That was the only way to describe it. A deep, resonant whoosh, as though the machine itself had sighed in relief. The hum returned, stronger now, more stable. The vibration smoothed, no longer jagged but rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. The executives erupted in shocked shouts. Stratton froze, his face pale, his eyes wide. Maya stepped back slowly, her chest heaving. The engine was still unstable, still faltering at times, but the barrier had been broken. For the first time in its existence, it was aligned with its own rhythm. Stratton recovered quickly, his pride scrambling for a foothold. "This proves nothing," he said, his voice sharp, desperate. "It's temporary. A fluke. Anyone could have." "Anyone?" Maya cut him off, her voice firm. "Then why didn't they? Why didn't your engineers see what I saw? Why did they fail while I succeeded?" Stratton's mouth opened, but no words came. His silence was louder than any insult. Maya didn't press further. She didn't need to. The engine spoke for her now, its hum filling the chamber like a song no one could ignore. She rested her hand against the steel, closing her eyes for a moment. "You're not impossible," she whispered. "You were just waiting for someone to listen." The machine pulsed under her palm, steady, alive. Behind the glass, an executive whispered, "She's done it." Another shook his head, still in disbelief. No, that's not possible." But it was. They all knew it. Arthur Stratton's empire had been built on arrogance. But in this moment, that arrogance was shattered by the quiet strength of a woman he had mocked, underestimated, and tried to crush. The barrier was broken, and Maya Brooks had changed everything. The chamber trembled with possibility. The engine's hum had steadied into a rhythmic throb, no longer the fragile whispers of a broken machine, but the heartbeat of something reborn. Sparks crackled along Maya's improvised wires, casting bursts of light across the steel like fireflies in a storm. Behind the glass, the executives had fallen silent. Gone were the mocking grins, the folded arms of smug disbelief. In their place, wide eyes, pressed faces, nervous whispers. Men and women who had invested fortunes in a dream now watched it stir under the hands of the woman they had dismissed. Arthur Stratton stood apart, frozen. His eyes were locked on the engine, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. This was the moment he had dreaded but never believed possible. The impossible engine, his failure, was coming alive. Inside the chamber, Maya's breath came fast but steady. Her hand shook with exhaustion, but her focus was unbreakable. Every adjustment she had made, every alignment corrected, had brought the engine closer to balance. She felt its rhythm now, pulsing with her own heartbeat. Her father's voice echoed once more. "The first spark proves it can live. The roar proves it will never die." She wiped the sweat from her brow, her eyes fixed on the ignition coil. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see if you're ready." She reached for the final switch. The engine coughed again, louder this time, the sound reverberating through the chamber like thunder. A wave of heat rolled off the machine, washing over her face. The piston shuddered, then began to move, slowly, unevenly at first, then smoother. The hum rose, deepening into a growl. Lights flickered across the chamber as the machine pulled power, demanding more than it had in years. The floor trembled beneath Maya's feet. She adjusted her bypass one final time, fine-tuning the rhythm. Then it happened. With a deafening roar, the engine sprang to life. The sound was enormous, primal, like the bellow of a creature waking after a long tortured sleep. The pistons pumped in perfect synchronization, the gears turning with ferocious speed. The glow of energy coursed through the wires, flooding the chamber with golden light. Maya staggered back, her eyes wide with awe. She had done it. The impossible was alive. Behind the glass, chaos erupted. "Oh my God!" one executive gasped. "It's working!" cried another. No, "No, this isn't possible," whispered a third, shaking his head as though denial could erase what he was seeing. Arthur Stratton didn't move. His face was pale, drained of its usual smug certainty. His empire, his arrogance, his narrative of power, all of it shook under the thunder of that machine. Maya looked toward him through the glass. Their eyes met. For the first time since she had entered this tower of arrogance, Stratton didn't smirk. He didn't taunt. He didn't laugh. He simply stared at her, his pride crumbling in silence. Maya raised her chin, her voice steady, though it could barely be heard above the roar. "This is the truth you never wanted to hear." The engine thundered on, its rhythm smooth now, powerful. The vibrations made the chamber walls shake, but Maya wasn't afraid. She stepped closer, her hand brushing the steel. The machine pulsed under her touch, alive, fierce, grateful. Tears stung her eyes. This wasn't just about an engine. It was about her father's lessons, about every dismissal she had endured, every moment of being underestimated. It was about proving that knowledge, patience, and respect could do what arrogance never could. She whispered, "We did it, Dad." Stratton finally moved. He slammed his fist against the glass. "Shut it down!" he roared, his voice breaking through the intercom. The executives turned toward him, stunned. "Shut it down?" one asked. "But sir, it's working. It's finally working." Stratton's eyes blazed. "Do as I say." But the words rang hollow. For the first time, his power wavered. The people around him weren't laughing anymore. They were looking at Maya, at the machine, at the future they had just witnessed. Maya didn't shut it down. She held her ground, her hand firm on the steel. She could feel the engine's strength building, each second louder, stronger, more undeniable. "You can't silence it now," she said, her voice steady. "It's awake." Stratton's face twisted with fury, but he couldn't stop it. The engine roared on, filling every corner of the building, echoing like a declaration that the impossible was no longer impossible. The executives began murmuring. Words like potential investment and history floated through the glass. They weren't looking at Stratton anymore. Their eyes were on Maya. She realized it then. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about shifting the balance of power. For years, Stratton had used arrogance as his weapon. But now, knowledge was hers. And knowledge had won. Finally, with careful precision, Maya began easing the machine down. She adjusted her bypass, lowering the current, guiding the rhythm toward stillness. The roar softened into a hum, then into silence. The chamber stilled. The great engine stood, no longer a failure but a promise. Maya stepped back, her chest heaving, her face shining with sweat and determination. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar had been. Every eye was on her. Through the glass, Stratton's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Maya broke the silence herself. "It works. It has always worked. You just never understood how to listen." The executives erupted. Some clapped, some spoke over one another, their voices bubbling with excitement. They had seen the impossible, and it had been revealed not by the CEO they feared but by the woman he had mocked. Stratton sank into his chair, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Maya stood tall in the chamber, her hand still resting on the engine. She didn't need applause. She didn't need their praise. The moment spoke for itself. This was the truth, undeniable and eternal. The impossible engine was alive. And so was she. The chamber was silent once more, but the silence was different now. Before, it had been the silence of doubt, of a dead machine mocked and abandoned. Now it was the silence of awe, the silence that followed revelation. The engine stood gleaming under the harsh lights, humming faintly with residual power. It was no longer the corpse they had called impossible. It was proof. Maya Brooks stepped back, her palms streaked with grease, her clothes dusted with grime, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. And yet, she stood taller than she ever had. Through the glass, the executives stared at her with faces pale and stunned. Their whispers filled the air, words she could barely catch. Genius, unbelievable, history. They weren't looking at Arthur Stratton anymore. Their eyes belonged to her. Stratton himself remained frozen, gripping the edge of the glass barrier as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white. The man who had built an empire on arrogance now stared at his own undoing. The hiss of the door cut through the silence. Slowly, Stratton entered the chamber. His footsteps echoed with none of the confidence they once carried. The air shifted with every step, the weight of pride and humiliation pressing down on him. Maya didn't move. She waited, her chin lifted, her eyes steady as his figure drew closer. He stopped a few feet away, his silver cufflinks glinting faintly under the light, though their shine seemed hollow now. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The machine's faint hum filled the space between them. Finally, Stratton broke the silence. His voice was low, rougher than before. How? The chamber was silent once more, but the silence was different now. Before, it had been the silence of doubt, of a dead machine mocked and abandoned. Now it was the silence of awe, the silence that followed revelation. The engine stood gleaming under the harsh lights, humming faintly with residual power. It was no longer the corpse they had called impossible. It was proof. Maya Brooks stepped back, her palms streaked with grease, her clothes dusted with grime, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. And yet, she stood taller than she ever had. Through the glass, the executives stared at her with faces pale and stunned. Their whispers filled the air, words she could barely catch. Genius, unbelievable, history. They weren't looking at Arthur Stratton anymore. Their eyes belonged to her. Stratton himself remained frozen, gripping the edge of the glass barrier as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white. The man who had built an empire on arrogance now stared at his own undoing. The hiss of the door cut through the silence. Slowly, Stratton entered the chamber. His footsteps echoed with none of the confidence they once carried. The air shifted with every step, the weight of pride and humiliation pressing down on him. Maya didn't move. She waited, her chin lifted, her eyes steady as his figure drew closer. He stopped a few feet away, his silver cufflinks glinting faintly under the light, though their shine seemed hollow now. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The machine's faint hum filled the space between them. Finally, Stratton broke the silence. His voice was low, rougher than before. How? I do, Maya said softly. And so do you. That's why you're angry. He took a step closer, towering over her, trying to reclaim the power that had slipped through his hands. Don't think for a moment this makes you my equal. Maya didn't flinch. She stepped forward too, closing the gap between them. Equal? She said, her voice sharp as steel. No. Today, I was better. The words cut through him. For the first time, the mighty Arthur Stratton had no reply. The chamber door hissed open again, but this time it wasn't Stratton who commanded the space, it was the executives. One by one they entered, their suits gleaming, their faces eager. They moved not toward Stratton, but toward Maya. "Miss Brooks," one said, extending a hand. "That was extraordinary." "Revolutionary," said another. "You've saved us," a third added, his tone reverent. Maya shook their hands politely, her expression calm, though inside her heart swelled. She had been doubted, dismissed, ridiculed, and now they stood before her, men and women of power, offering respect they had never thought she deserved. She glanced past them at Stratton. He stood alone, shoulders stiff, his empire crumbling not from a hostile takeover or market crash, but from truth. One executive turned toward him. "Mr. Stratton, with all due respect, I think leadership of this project should shift. Ms. Brooks has clearly demonstrated the expertise we need." The words hung heavy in the air. Stratton's face turned crimson. His empire, his authority, slipping through his fingers. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply met his eyes and said, "This was never about me. It was about listening to what everyone else ignored. I just happened to be the one who did." Her humility was the final blow. Stratton looked at her, his lips trembling with rage and humiliation. Then, slowly, he exhaled. His shoulders sagged. He turned away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. He had been defeated. Maya laid her hand one last time on the engine. Its hum vibrated through her palm, steady and alive. She smiled softly. Her father's words echoed in her heart. "Respect the machine, and it will carry you further than you dreamed." She whispered, "We did it!" The executives surrounded her, already talking of the future, of patents and breakthroughs, of history being made. But their words faded into the background. For Maya, the moment wasn't about power or money. It was about something simpler, deeper. It was about respect. The respect her father had taught her for the work. The respect the engine had demanded. And now, the respect she had finally earned. As she walked out of the chamber, her head high, Stratton remained behind, a shadow against the glass. For years, he had been the master of this empire. But today, the empire belonged to someone else. And as Maya Brooks stepped into the light, covered in grease and sweat but shining with undeniable brilliance, the world knew her name. Maya Brooks, the woman who made the impossible engine roar.